In Rome, your body was never legally yours. Your master could whip you for looking at him wrong, work you to death in a mine, or use you sexually, and none of it was a crime. That's the flaw. 10 ranks of male slave, worst to best, and only one of them ever escapes that flaw completely. You don't choose your rank. Rome chooses it for you, in about the time it takes to look at your hands, your teeth, and your paperwork. If you were born to an enslaved mother, you're already enslaved. No ceremony, no decision, just a line in a household ledger. Verify. Exact legal term for slave-born individual, verni. If you were captured in war, you go through a slave market, and the trader auctioning you off has already decided your entire future in about the time it takes to glance at your arms. That decision drops you into one of 10 tiers. Some of these men will die in under a year. One of them has a real shot at walking away a Roman citizen. You're going to see all 10, worst to best, and the gap between them is the actual dirty secret nobody puts in the history books. Slavery in Rome wasn't one experience. It was a 10-level system, and where you landed decided whether you lived to 30. Stick around, because rank 1 isn't a job at all. It's a loophole, and it's the only tier where a slave's son could die a senator. Rank 10, the quarry and mine slave. This is the bottom. If you get sent here, Rome has already written you off. You're chained in gangs of 10, worked underground or in open-pit quarries, and the life expectancy is brutal. Many men here don't survive past their first couple of years. Verify. Specific average survival figures for Roman mine labor. No skill required. No skill wanted. You are replaceable labor, and the Romans priced you accordingly, cheaper than a mule in some records, because a mule needed feeding even when it wasn't working, and you didn't get that consideration. Punishment for slowing down wasn't a warning. It was the whip, and repeat offenses could mean being sold even further down, to work you literally to death. And here's the part that gets left out of the textbooks. This wasn't a fringe punishment for criminals. This was the default sentence for thousands of ordinary prisoners of war. Rank 10 wasn't rare. It was common. Rank 9, the ergastulum field slave. One step up, and it's barely a step. You work someone's farm estate, chained overnight in a barracks called an ergastulum, literally built so you can't run. Sunrise to sunset in the fields, overseen by a villicus who answers directly to the owner and has zero incentive to go easy on you. Here's the detail that should bother you. Agricultural writers of the time, men like Columella, literally wrote manuals comparing the upkeep of slaves to the upkeep of livestock, line by line. Verify. Exact framing in Columella's De Re Rustica. You weren't a worker with a bad boss. You were inventory with a feeding schedule. Quick gut check before we go further. If you had to guess, what percentage of Rome's population do you think was enslaved at its peak? Drop a number. Rank 8, the urban construction and porter slave. Better than the quarry. Not by much. You're in the city now, hauling stone, mixing concrete, carrying loads up unfinished insulae. Rome's cramped apartment blocks that collapsed with depressing regularity. Urban construction accidents were common enough that they show up repeatedly in the historical record. Verify. Specific collapse frequency claims. The upside, and it's a real one, you're visible. City slaves occasionally get noticed by their owners for reliability, and that visibility is the first rung on a ladder the mine slave never even sees. Nobody promotes a man they never look at. Rank 7, the unskilled household slave. Now you're indoors, and that single fact changes almost everything about your odds of survival. You're cleaning, fetching water, running errands for a Roman household, a familiar that might include dozens of other slaves with their own internal pecking order. You eat better. You're beaten less, because a visibly damaged house slave embarrasses the owner in front of guests. But you're also watched constantly, and the line between servant and furniture is thinner than you'd think. Owners genuinely believed, and wrote, that slaves had no legitimate family, no legal right to their own children, and no protection against being sold away from them at any moment. Verify. Specifics on legal status of slave marriage, contubernium. This is also the tier where the real dirty secret of Roman slavery sits, and it applies to men just as much as it does to women. A slave's body legally belonged to the owner in every sense, including sexually, and Roman law gave enslaved men no protection against it. This wasn't whispered about. It was assumed. We're not going to dwell on it, but skipping it would be dishonest. This is one of the ugliest, least discussed realities of the system, at every tier above and below this one. Rank 6. The body slave personal attendant. You're one man, assigned to one master, and your entire job is proximity. You dress him, you shave him, you walk half a step behind him at the baths and the forum. It sounds small. It isn't. Proximity is power in Rome. You hear the gossip, you know the debts, you know who's sleeping with whose wife. Smart body slaves used this. Some became genuinely trusted, close enough that owners left them small sums in wills, or freed them outright in old age as a reward for decades of loyalty. A verify, frequency of manumission via testamentary bequest for personal attendants. The catch: your entire future depends on one man's mood, health, and memory. If he dies without freeing you, you're resold, and every year of trust you built resets to 0. Rank 5. The skilled craftsman. This is where the math starts changing in your favor. You're a blacksmith, a carpenter, a potter, someone who makes things Rome actually needs. Skilled slaves were expensive to buy, which meant owners protected their investment instead of running you into the ground. Some craftsman slaves were even allowed to run workshops semi-independently and keep a cut of the profit, a private fund called a peculium. A verify, legal mechanics of peculium and how much slaves typically retained. That peculium is the actual game changer. It's not legally your money, technically your owner could seize it anytime. But in practice, enough slaves used it to eventually buy their own freedom that it became a recognized path out. Rank 5 isn't just a better job. It's the first tier where you can see the exit. If you had to pick one skill to walk into ancient Rome with to survive, what would it be? One word. Rank 4. The educated slave. Scribe, tutor, accountant. Here's the twist most people never expect. Some of the most educated men in Rome were enslaved. Greek-speaking slaves, captured from conquered territories, were often more literate than the Romans who owned them. They taught Roman children rhetoric and philosophy, managed household accounts, wrote their master's correspondence. Cicero's own secretary, a slave, later freedman, named Tyro, is credited with inventing a shorthand system used for centuries after. A verify, Tyro's exact role and the historical accuracy of the shorthand attribution. Your body still legally belongs to someone else. But your mind is now the most valuable thing your owner possesses, and that flips the leverage. Educated slaves were freed at meaningfully higher rates than laborious, because a freed tutor who stayed loyal was worth more than an enslaved one who resented you. Verify, comparative manumission rate data by slave occupation. Rank 3. The gladiator. Not what you'd expect at rank 3. Higher risk, higher reward, and genuinely rare. Most gladiators were slaves, criminals, or prisoners of war, but the ones who survived their first few fights could become something no field slave ever became: famous. Graffiti from Pompeii shows gladiators with fan followings, complete with what we'd basically recognize as fan mail today. Verify, specific Pompeii graffiti examples and their content. Survive enough fights and win enough crowds, and an owner might award you a rudis, a wooden training sword that symbolized freedom, sometimes granted mid-career while you were still alive to enjoy it. That's rare. Most gladiators didn't get there, but the ones who did skipped every other tier on this list in a single afternoon. We're 2 tiers from the top, and the pattern should be obvious by now. Every rank above rank 7 has one thing in common: visibility. Rome didn't free slaves out of guilt. It freed the ones it couldn't ignore. Rank 2. The villicus, estate manager. This is the highest a slave could climb while still technically being one. The villicus ran the entire estate, other slaves, finances, crop planning, sometimes properties his owner never even visited in person. He held more day-to-day power than most free tenant farmers. He could discipline other slaves, negotiate with suppliers, make decisions worth more money than he'd see in a lifetime of wages, if he'd been getting wages at all. Owners frequently freed loyal villaci, because by that point the relationship had quietly become closer to a business partnership than ownership. A verify, statistical frequency of villicus manumission. Some villaci, once freed, kept managing the same estate as a paid freedman. Same job, same desk, completely different legal status. Rank 1. The freedman with a Roman patron. Technically, this isn't slavery anymore. That's exactly the point. Manumission, formal freedom, didn't erase your past, but it rewrote your future. As a libertus, you became a Roman citizen. You could own property, make contracts, and, this is the part that should genuinely surprise you, your sons could be born fully free, with none of the legal restrictions that followed you. Some grandsons of freedmen entered politics. A tiny number climbed into genuine wealth and influence. The catch, because there's always one. You owed your former owner, now your patron, ongoing loyalty and sometimes labor for the rest of your life. Freedom in Rome was never a clean break. It was a renegotiated leash. But compare that to where we started, a man chained underground in a quarry with a life expectancy measured in months, and rank 1 isn't just better. It's a different species of existence entirely. Same system. Same starting line for most of these men. 10 completely different outcomes. If you're the kind of person who wants the entire brutal hierarchy of the ancient world mapped out like this, subscribing means you don't miss the next one. Here's the uncomfortable thing this list actually proves. Rome's slave system wasn't random cruelty. It was a machine with an incentive structure, and if you were valuable enough, visible enough, or lucky enough to be noticed by the right person, that same machine could hand you citizenship. If you weren't, it worked you to death and never wrote your name down. That's not a comforting thought. It's not supposed to be. Roughly a third of Rome ran on people who had no legal say in any of this. Verify, cite a specific, defensible percentage era for enslaved population share. The empire's marble columns and road networks were built by men at rank 10 and rank 9 who never made it to rank 5. Out of these 10, which rank do you think you'd have actually survived? Be honest. If this kind of what would your actual life have looked like history hits different for you, I've got a full survival breakdown of ancient Rome. Different classes, different rules, same brutal math. Go watch that one next. Subscribe if you want rank lists like this for other empires, because Rome wasn't even close to the worst one.